Hello. I want to talk to you briefly about something that's rather odd um, related to classical conditioning. I doubt very seriously if any of you have heard of this. This is going to be coming from your reading for the week. It's called Preparedness and Conditioning. Preparedness and Classical Conditioning. Um, and we're going to use your textbook does this, and I like the example that they chose, the authors chose. They use fear and a couple other things. We'll start out with fear. Basically, it's a form of conditioning that exemplifies preparedness. Uh, it's an important aspect of it. Backward conditioning, if you did the reading, uh, is conditioning where the unconditioned stimulus precedes the neutral stimulus, and it really doesn't produce much conditioning. So, excuse me, I'm sorry. It depends on what the circumstances are. It depends on what the situation is. It depends on many factors. But I'm going to give you the basics of this. So, the general idea in research uh, is that many species of animals, including us, we're animals, have inherited predisposition to fear related to certain types of events. You may have heard this, and this is true, that you're born with two basic fears: the basic fear of sudden loud noises and the basic fear of falling. And if you want to get uh, if you want to get Darwinistic with it, uh, I don't particularly care for that explanation of things, but sometimes you have to look beyond what we consider the true sources. um, it would make sense from the aspect of adaptation or not even adaptation, survival, that you need to be afraid of sudden loud noises because it could be that that's something getting ready to jump out and eat you if you're an ancient human being, or going up to high places in search of food or whatever, and not understanding that falling means death. So that would be a predisposition. That would be a basic fundamental fear that you're born with. But we get a little more involved in it than that. So we go beyond this basic fear thing. And what we do is we enter into a realm of uh, classical conditioning that takes into consideration the consequences, not like operant conditioning, but consequences, or let me say better than that, consequential association. So if you don't know what that is, you can look it up on one of your unofficial assignments. And your book likes to use or has used taste aversion, and that's simple. And the reason I think they chose it because we all have that. There's certain things that we don't eat because either we don't like the taste or we don't like the effects or both. And I could sit here and name off a dozen foods, and you could too, that you try to avoid because you don't like the taste necessarily, and you don't like the end results of it. Greek yogurt, no offense to anyone. So taste diversion, classical conditioning, that you have, meaning you have paired some kind of negative experience with something you ate. And again, we're using food, and they use food, and I know why they did it because we all eat. So if I eat something and then it later on I get sick, it could be that I associate that with that food, whether or not it was really the source, and that's an important thing. Now, you've all probably had stomach upsets, and you think, I should not have eaten that whatever I ate because that's what did this. Well, we're not medical doctors. Uh, you have to understand the, looking for a word to simplify this. I'm going to say distance. That's not the word I really want to use, but I'll use it. What that time elapsed. Okay, I ate this yesterday. Today I'm sick, right? So it's easy to make an association. We all had, many of us, I guess, had Super Bowl parties. I didn't, but I did eat things that were not necessarily in my normal diet yesterday. And if it had made me ill today, I would have said, oh, it must have been, I left the deviled eggs out too long, or whatever the case is. That's what we're trying to get across here. It's something that you associate with, sorry about that, y'all, that causes you to make that connection. A lot of them are real. I mean, if you eat something and it makes you sick a lot of times, but not always, or something that you drink, that if I ate a deviled egg yesterday, it didn't cause me to get the flu today. So we can make those decisions. But nonetheless, what if I get the flu and then right before I caught the flu, I was drinking something or eating something? I know that the item didn't give me the flu, but I may associate the flu with the item because the experience was so uh, unsettling, so bad. That makes sense. I think it should. It's not that complicated. So taste aversion uh, really follows the same conditioning as just basic classical conditioning. I pause for a minute. Let me pick back up where I left. Um, taste aversion is just an example of classical conditioning, but more specific. So let's look at a term or two, just to give you some specificity to this. Stimulus generalization. That's when you have similarity. If you look back through your intro class that I'm sure you had 100 years ago, and it talks about Pavlov and then John B. Watson's experiment with Albert, you will see that the stimulus generalization is mentioned there. And we're using food, so let's stick with that category. Having an aversion to foods that taste similar but really aren't the same. It's not the same food. Or it could be in the same category, like one type of fish tastes a particular way, so you fall into the stimulus generalization uh, throws, and you classify all fish as being yucky because maybe you had an association with that in the past and you had a problem, um, or you have had a bad experience with a particular food. And I think your book uses onions. I'm not sure. And that may have caused you to have problems in the past, or it could be anything, peas or whatever. And then you eat a meal, and that's included, and that does what's called overshadow. It overshadows the development of an aversion to a food item because you've had experiences with that food item in the past that weren't very pleasurable. And you can pick any food item you want to. The bottom line is how you are being conditioned. And it's not just with food, it's with everything. Television commercials, the Super Bowl commercials, use this, use classical conditioning, use repetitiveness to condition you that this running shoe is better than that running shoe, or this beer is better than that beer, or whatever the case is. This medication for a runny nose is better than that medication for a runny nose, and so on and so forth. So, um, they marketing knows how to use that, and I was trying to think of something that most likely you have a lot of familiarity with. Couldn't do it. Um, in the case of taste aversion, again, because this is the good example, we have something called latent inhibition. So you're more likely to associate something new um, with a sickness, for example, than a more familiar item. Uh, let's say you drink. I'm not going to call any names of them, but let's say you drink a particular kind of cola, and then somebody says, "Oh yeah, but you ought to try this. This is better than that cola," and you drink it, and then you associate whatever negative effects you have with the newer um, item than with the older item, and it could be the older item that caused the problem. Hope that makes sense. Uh, I think your book talks about poisoning a rat. I've never poisoned one. I've caught some in mouse traps, but nonetheless, I guess they have an aversion to mice traps now, if that's how you say that, a mouse trap. There are other conditionings, obviously, operant conditioning. Classical conditioning is our major focus at the moment, and there are some um, disparities, if you want to call it that. I don't know if that's the right word we want to use, but using taste aversion again as our example, taste aversion is really similar to most other forms of classical conditioning, but there's some differences, and I want to point the differences out, not to confuse you, but just to give you an idea as to how shallow Pavlov's work was really. And we have the nuts and bolts of neutral stimulus, unconditioned stimulus and response, and so on and so forth that you're familiar with. But there's so much more to it than that. So, formation of associations over long delays. That's one of the major differences in this. Most classical conditioning, uh, proximity was the word I was looking for earlier, by the way. The ingestion of something and then uh, close proximity to the occurrence of the results. So that's what the word was that I was trying to seek, and the reason I remember is because I'm going to have to use it here. The formation of associations over long delays. Taste diversion can occur within hours of um, having the eating experience and having the sickness experience. Um, that's one major difference. One trial conditioning, that's another major difference. Strong conditioned aversions, taste aversions, that is, can actually be um, with the single pairing of food and illness. So, what does that tell you? That removes the repetitiveness, right? It's so powerful that it overcomes the repetitive need for classical conditioning. Specificity associations. Uh, when you eat something and you become nauseous, what do you associate the nausea with? And that goes back to what I was talking about earlier. It can jump parameters. So maybe I associate nausea caused by a food with something that I heard or something else I experienced outside of the realm of food, but yet I have that association. And that's why it's called specificity of association. Um, Having the experience unrelated to really what the cause of it was. Um, there are practical applications for it. Again, this hopefully you'll never have to go through, but again, this is somewhat addressed in your book, and it uses an example of uh, chemotherapy. There people unfortunately undergoing chemotherapy have a lot of side effects, and so what's done to fight off latent inhibition and some other things, is they try to feed people or try to get them to eat foods that they're very familiar with. It can become a mundane diet, bless their hearts, but that's just one way of combating this type of classical conditioning related to a very poor experience. So, okay, I hope I hadn't thoroughly confused you, but I wanted you to get the idea that simple classical conditioning is not always simple. There's a whole lot more that goes into that. And then when we talk about classical conditioning formed by associations, it's not always the case. Uh, and it could be associations with something that has nothing to do with the conditioning that you experienced. So there's your little summary. All right, so this will be posted soon, and I hope to hear from you, see you in class, or whatever the case is soon. See ya.